So I'm going to tell it to you straight right now. You don't need me to tell you whether or not you should buy this game. By the time this video is up, almost everyone who wanted to play it has played it. They beat it like 5 times and got the true ending. 5 times. Those people likely discovered new endings that aren't even reported yet. That's how many times they've played it already. The "Where is Silksong" meme was a constant in various video game showcases for years, so the game doesn't really need any introduction. So I'm just going to front load this review by telling you straight up that Hollow Knight Silksong is a go for it. And if you want to play it yourself, you can play it for $20 on PC, PS5, PS4, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, essentially everything. It's everything. You can play it on everything. So go for it. If that's all you wanted to hear, then I hope you've enjoyed your stay. I'm TUSDarryl, and I'll catch you all later. But if you wanted to hear me yap about it, then yeah, I could talk for a while. You should be warned though, I'm going to show some abilities you won't get until mid to late game, as well as the mostly full map in the footage somewhere. I'll refrain from major story spoilers and boss spoilers to the best of my ability, but if I feel like I need to mention something spoiler related, just know that I might. This review will contain some spoilers if you haven't played Hollow Knight Silksong yet. That's all I'm saying. In Hollow Knight Silksong, you play as Hornet as she explores the land of Farloom. Well, less explores and more like was captured and taken to the land of Farloom. From the point where she escapes captivity, you are quickly let known that things aren't quite as they seem in this land, as pilgrims make their way toward the highest point as part of their pilgrimage. As was the case in the first Hollow Knight, you are very much left in the dark with what the heck is going on, so from that point on, figure it out. Not saying that the game doesn't spell it out for you, but it can be cryptic at times, in the very same way that any Souls game can be cryptic. That said, you get a very good idea, and no, you don't need to play the first Hollow Knight to really get an understanding of what's going on. You can play Silksong on its own, but it would help. As I was finishing that statement, I could just hear in the back of my head the collective of every Hollow Knight player out there that has 100% of that game and 100% of this one. Now, I could go into more detail, but there's a lot of story in this game, and I am not a Hollow Knight lore channel, so I'm not going to go much deeper than I usually do. But just know that this story is really good. The overarching stuff kind of goes over my head a bit, but the cast of characters that you meet are very memorable. Hornet is as straightforward and stern as you remember, with a handful of silly interactions between her and other characters. Unlike the knight in the first game, Hornet has a voice much like she did in the first game, and speaks with other characters, which gives a much more engaging vibe to the story, rather than the more observant vibe that the knight had in the first game, which definitely works there. Like, the same vibes I had with the knight in the first game were the same ones I had with Isaac in the first Dead Space. Isaac didn't talk in the first Dead Space, but it left me open to kind of just wonder about the world without someone yapping about it. Thankfully, Hornet doesn't yap about it. She is just as silent most of the time unless she has someone to talk to. Besides Hornet, I have some favorite characters like Sherma, the Bell Beast. Yes, she is a character to me, and arguably the best one besides Sherma, and Shakira. Her name is actually Chakra, but I like calling her Shakira. The bosses you face are also diverse, and I have my favorites among them as well, but again, I'm not going to spoil that. Well, at least not spoil all of them. I will give a shout out to TUSReview because that dude is awesome. Of course, you'll come across a much wider cast of characters if you decide to go off the beaten path and explore further, but I'll leave them for you to find. So, to pull back the curtain real quick before I move on to gameplay stuff, I just want to say that when I beat the game originally back in January, I was prepared to review it right then and there. But then my brother hit me with a "I don't know" and told me that I should go ahead and get the true ending as well for a more well-rounded perspective for my review of Silksong as a whole. My brother would help me out a bit whenever I got lost, and I would ask him for directions since he's a bit of a Hollow Knight fanatic himself. He's the one who would dive into the story and the lore and all that. Meanwhile, I'm like, Bug Go Shaw. Again, I think the lore in the world is very fascinating. I'm very surface level with it. Besides him pointing out whether or not I was in the right place, and besides me using him as a guide when I was trying to make sure I had all the requirements to get the third act of the game, because you don't get that by default, you have to do some very specific things, I handled the majority of the game by myself while hitting my head against the wall. You didn't ask, but again, I just wanted to be transparent and say that I wasn't afraid to ask for a hint or look for a guide for a hint. Sometimes we just need a bit of help, and I think that's okay. Kudos to y'all though, who did it completely blind. Y'all the real ones. Anyway, I don't care too much about getting the true ending for reviews generally if one is available, but hey, I did it for the first game, so why not? Well, my brother was right. Unlocking Act 3 and getting the true ending there added a whole other layer to my overall experience to the game, which is good. When I got the normal ending or one of the other endings, it was decent overall, but I didn't quite feel like I hit the same highs that I did when I played the first Hollow Knight. The third act and true ending really did bring it all together in an awesome, semi-cryptic package. So if you decide to play the game, try and go for the true ending. It's definitely worth it. But that's enough yapping about the game's story and my views on the game as a whole and me admitting that I needed some help. Let's talk about gameplay.
Fadastama.
Some minute.
Hollow Knight Silksong, much like the first game, is a Metroidvania game that is equal parts familiar and more ambitious, significantly more ambitious. Booting up Silksong very much felt like coming home after being away for so long after the very first swing of Hornet's Needle. Except this time, we're a whole lot more agile, and so are the enemies. Now I'll say this up front, Hornet is very much my kind of character to play and control. This is a weird comparison to make, but if the Knight felt like Dark Souls 1, then Hornet feels like Bloodborne, meaning, at least until late game, my approach to playing the first game as the Knight was very slow and methodical, while Hornet had me going, Shago Bird. Like running around, sprinting around, flipping off of attacks, having all these tools at your disposal. All that jazz felt great. In true Metroidvania fashion, you will unlock new abilities and the like the more you explore. These abilities include special attacks and movement abilities and other abilities that kind of serve as one or the other, sometimes both. You can also find new crests to give Hornet a new fighting style that suits whatever your playstyle may be. While exploring, you will also find different items to help ease the pain you're going to feel from all the enemies that can two-tap you. I will hold back that rant, but it's going to break containment. As I briefly mentioned earlier, some of the kinds of items that you'll find are tools, which are essentially a variety of gadgets, extra weapons, or even things to buff Hornet. That system goes fairly deep, and going into each one will take a while. So just know that there's a lot of different builds that you can work with in this game if you're willing to put in that work. But since Hornet controls the way she does and has so many abilities and tools, literal tools at her disposal, of course, the enemies have to follow suit. Or at least they have to in regard to their damage and or difficulty. The enemies in Silksong can hit like a truck, as very few of them deal 1 pip of damage. In fact, I don't think any of them only deal 1 pip of damage, but I digress. Which basically means my Sha don't go as burr as much as I would like it to. Some of the most basic enemies in the beginning of the game can feel like mini-bosses in their own right, and in a way, they can be, at least when they're thrown into one of the many gauntlets that you'll come across throughout the game. That said, in fairness, there have been patches to help with easing some of the enemy damage output, among other things, to varying degrees of success. But see, the thing is, as much as I want to rant about the enemy damage and all of that, it makes sense to me. I just think it was overdone a little bit. Again, Hornet is no slouch. If you know what you're doing, there is no challenge from those enemies outside of the initial times you fight them. So them dealing a bit more damage and forcing you to be a bit more careful and slow down makes sense, because you can do a lot. That doesn't make it any less annoying though. But in fairness, once again, it's not like the game doesn't also give you a lot of opportunities to make yourself stronger beyond the things I mentioned. Like at one point I had to ask my brother if I was missing something because I was getting my tail handed to me in the late game or mid to late game, and he looked at my gear and all that and saw that I was still operating with mostly early game gear and materials. I was just stockpiled with stuff that I had not used. You'd think I know better at this point, but at some point I guess I got tunnel vision and started really only focusing on the main quest line instead of, I don't know, focusing on the primary mechanic of Metroidvanias. Exploration. Needless to say, after taking his advice, I went back, cleaned up, and got better abilities, gear, and the like that made things much easier for myself. Now, I don't want to say that my earlier criticisms of enemy damage are negated after I did that, because they still hit you for 2 damage, but I think it would have helped if I had just, even the playing field, or knew to even the playing field. Now, I have a whole other paragraph here of a rant of a specific boss fight, specifically one of the Savage Beastfly fights, which are a pain in the ass, and I think were one of the primary things hit in the nerfing or adjustment patches that the game had. Because the points I make in the rant are the same that I made earlier about the 2 damage thing, I'm just going to summarize it with this. That boss fight in of itself on its own was not that big of a deal, or at least in the space I was in. It was a fight on molten lava. What did bother me were the 2 ads that also showed up and added to the annoyance of that fight. I was there for so long. When you combine, forgive my French, bullshit enemy tracking, on top of the fact that the ads do about as much damage as the boss does, so while you're focusing on the boss and flipping and jumping over that boss, landing hits, you also have to pay attention to the 2 ads who can also spit lava at you or whatever they were spitting at you, and also do 2 pips of damage, just like the boss typically can. That fight specifically pissed me off. But beyond that, to give credit where credit is due, the boss fights in this game are overall fantastic. They're extremely varied, and some of them you'll have some fights that are like, okay, that happened. It wasn't a nothing burger, but it happened, cool. And then others that are not only a fight for your survival, both your mental survival and Hornet survival, but also they're just extremely memorable. Some of those set pieces are beautiful. The stages you fight on, the music, and it all comes together and makes you forgive the fact that you're getting your ass kicked for the 75th time. I know it sounds like I'm going between hating the game and wanting to strangle it and loving the game and wanting to hug it, but at the same time, yeah, but there are definitely more that I love about it than I do dislike about it. I said in the beginning, this is a go for it for a reason. Not a caution, not a hold up before you play this game, No, I gave it a go for it, i.e., hey, I said these things, yeah, okay, they're problems, but go, do it anyway. Anyway, terrible segue. Let's talk about exploration for a little bit. Exploration remains a lot of fun and then some, with some classic tricks of the genre making a return, as well as some surprises that are found along the way. Exploration is extremely rewarding, but Team Cherry are not afraid to get super petty with some of the shit they'll throw at you. 2 words, and forgive my French once again, fuck bile water. There are a lot of hazards to encounter, from enemies to the weather to the traps to the gauntlets and more as you explore. Every time I entered a new area, I would stop, take it slow, and carefully get a feel for what each room in that area was before I got fancy with my footwork. Some areas were more of a pain than others.
I'll be back.
But I think the game does a good job of helping you recognize patterns as it does with breaking them. It doesn't do the latter too often, but when it does, it do make you hesitant. With each environment comes more composed bangers from Christopher Lorcan, and that's just not something you can get enough of. Goated soundtrack. So beyond my gripes with the game's balancing, I'd say once again that Hollow Knight Silksong is an excellent game that is definitely worth your time. Just make sure you take said time with it. It is not the kind of game that you rush, as you can see from how long it took me to get this review out the door. As I stated earlier, and time again throughout this review, just to reassure you, Hollow Knight Silksong gets a go for it from me, and you can pick it up for $20 on just about everything, including GeForce Now and macOS. Now with Silksong done, I can focus on pressing on to the next games in my backlog without that sitting in the back of my mind until something like this happens again. I do not want to think about September. I do not want to think about all the games dropping in September. Man, until then, I hope you all have enjoyed your stay. I'm TUSDarryl, and I'll catch you all later. Fuck Bilewater.